Hi, everyone. So today I would love to read again out of The Greatest Secret. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to bring the attention to this book again. And why is that? Because a lot of people that I talk about, the non-duality, the awakening, the recognizing your true nature, and people that got on the other side, let's call it that way, they all were inspired by Rhonda Byrne's book. And we agree that it's on every page. Like when you really recognize your true nature and you pick up the book again, you can see it everywhere. And so we know that Rhonda also features all the teachers that inspired her. And the chances that you read something, one line from somebody, from a teacher, and I say teacher because that's how people understand what we mean. But there, of course, there is no such a thing as a non-duality teacher because it's not really a teaching. But on the other hand, we need to talk about it, so we use the words that we have available. So today, I would love to share out of chapter 8, and it goes about no more suffering. And so the first line says, here's the bottom line. Suffering is optional. And this comes from Byron Katie. Suffering is optional. And I know that is very hard for a lot of people to take. But you are not meant to suffer. And when you're living as your true self awareness, you will never suffer. It can be hard to imagine a life without suffering, but most assuredly, it can be your life right now. And I know that this is true. It doesn't mean that when you recognize your true nature, that there are no ups and downs and that there are no emotions and that there is no disappointment and anger and all the different emotions and feelings that a human being can have, but you will have them without the suffering. And so it's a huge difference. It is so much more fun. Life becomes so much more fun. And then Anthony de Mello says, there is pain in the physical, but suffering is in the mind. And I think it's beautiful. There's pain in the physical. You can feel pain, but suffering is in the mind. It's like such a big difference between pain and suffering. And I love that. I love that. It's like so simple. There's pain in the physical, but suffering is in the mind. And then Jen Fraser, that I really love because she helped me so much. Your higher self does not suffer. Your familiar self can hardly figure out how not to suffer. Again, what a one-liner. I love it. Suffering is caused by believing negative thoughts. So suffering is self-imposed. And again, I know that for people that feel like they're suffering, it could be very hard to listen to that it is self-imposed. But what if that's true? Then it also gives you the ability to change it. You can change it, okay? So it gives you an enormous amount of power, which I like. Then Byron Katie says again, I discovered that when I believed my thoughts, I suffered. But that when I didn't believe them, I didn't suffer. And that this is true for every human being. Freedom is as simple as that. And I know that it is true because sometimes, and I had the habit of really like listening to my thoughts when like for many, many years, I would be up in the middle of the night and my thoughts would go crazy in the middle of the night. I don't know about you, but it could take like an enormous amount of room. It was as if there was an elephant in my bedroom. And so these thoughts were common and I would believe them. I would think that that was me. But now we know that those thoughts, they're just not us. So we don't have to listen to them. And if we don't, we're detached from that. So Rupert Spira says, whenever your suffering is contained in a single thought. I don't like this. In other words, we allow a single, flimsy, insubstantial thought to spoil our happiness. Again, it's like this is on page 139 and 140, and I go a little bit further. Our mind tends to respond to the circumstances of life with no, 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 while awareness always responds with yes, yes, yes to everything. Awareness says yes to no. That's what Ronda Byrne's teacher says. Saying no holds what you don't want to you. Saying yes to what you don't want releases your resistance, allowing what you don't want to change. It's counterintuitive, but that's how it works. When you say, no, I don't want this, you're resisting. And as you've come to understand, what you resist persists. And this is also what I learned from Abraham Hicks. So that's really Abraham Hicks that I can also hear in this. Like, don't resist it, because that's when you give it power. If you abide in this state of acceptance, you create no more negativity, no more suffering, no more unhappiness. You then live in a state of non-resistance, a state of grace and lightness, free of struggle. And that's from Eckhart Tolle, from The Power of Now. Then I'm a lover of what is, not because I'm a spiritual person, but because it hurts when I argue with reality. Oh my God. That's again from Byron Katie. And then Jen Fraser says again, if you were to altogether let go of the resistance in this moment, never to start it up again, by that very single gesture, you'd liberate yourself from an enormous burden of suffering. You have the choice in every second of the day to just let it go. You can just let it go. Even when I read this, it gives me an enormous amount of joy, and it makes me feel light, and it makes me feel so grateful that I am able to share this with you guys, because that is really, I think that probably gives me the most joy, like being able to share and to read this for you. If we don't resist what has happened, there's no conflict, and the energy of the situation passes. Without our resistance to something, it can't stay in our life. On the other hand, if we resist what happened, we'll hold the situation to us and will continue to suffer. The wonderful teacher, Sailor Bob Adamson, says to just allow experience to come and go without judgment. And I also spoke to Sailor Bob, and it was amazing to understand that everything is unfolding effortlessly without you. And I mean with that, like, you can try to hold it up, or you can try to change it, but it's never that way. It is just, it comes and goes. And if you can just allow it to happen, allow it to come and go without judgment, that's when there is no suffering. It is only grasping, the hanging on, or the resisting and pushing away that creates the bind of psychological suffering. And that's from Peter Lorre. Most people go to their graves believing suffering is unavoidable. How sad is that? If you turn from the possibility that it could be otherwise, you will suffer needlessly until the day you die. But here's something. The end of suffering would be the least of the benefits if you became free. The real miracle is not the profound undoing of anguish, but the riches that would flood the freed up space. Again, this is from Jen Fraser again. An instant end to suffering. What I'm about to share with you may not be the easiest thing to grasp, but if you can get it, it will take you out of suffering immediately. And this is what I mean, that on every page, there are pointers on how to recognize your true nature. And this is on page 142. Our mind makes it feel like we are the one who is suffering. And of course, if we unquestioningly believe our mind, our suffering is immense. But the truth is that you are the one that is aware of the suffering, rather than the one suffering. The one who is suffering is the idea you have of yourself that you believed, but it's not who you really are. Cool, isn't it? The end of suffering happens when you recognize that there is no one to suffer. This is from Hale Dwoskin. My teacher, says Ronda Byrne, would say to ask yourself this question. This is so important. Am I the one suffering? Or am I the one that is aware of the suffering? Am I the one suffering? Or am I the one aware of the suffering? If we can stop believing the mind's suggestion that we're the one suffering, the suffering will end immediately. I really challenge you to think about that in a way that you never did before. To just sit and ask yourself the question, who's suffering? If we can stop believing the mind's suggestion that we're the one suffering, the suffering will end immediately. Once the nature of the mind is understood, suffering can't exist. Again, from Byron Katie. Awareness opens the door, dissolves all the beliefs and opinions and ideas that are in the way of and covering up our natural state of happiness. Because when you understand that you are not suffering, that you are just the awareness that sees the suffering, then you can only be happy. And that's your natural state, the natural state of happiness. It's no wonder that when the machinery of suffering has fallen apart and the mind has grown quiet, the feeling is that you've come home. Home has found you, which is often the impression since you hadn't necessarily been trying to find your way there, not consciously anyhow. Or maybe you had been, but now you see you've been looking in the wrong places. Again, this is from Jen Fraser. Jen is so practical, which is very attractive to me. Like, I'm practical, and that's why I really could understand her pointers so well. There's one belief in particular that's the root cause of all the suffering in the world. It's the belief that we are separate, that we are a separate person. You know, people are always like, we are one, we are one. But do they really understand what it means? Because if they really would understand what it means, there would be no suffering. There would be no we are one screaming anymore, because there was nothing to talk about. With thought, our mind convinces you that you are just a person and that you are vulnerable to an entire world of things that could go wrong. If you believe the mind's story of separateness, you will be completely under the control of your mind. Your mind will send a constant feed of fearful thoughts that you are vulnerable, bad things can happen to you, and that you and your life are limited. So this is living your life from a place of fear and a place of fear and lack. And so if that's what you have in your consciousness, that's what you're going to create, a life of fear and lack. It's not fun. It's not joyful. That's not what we are meant to do. Sadly, this will become your life if you believe it to be true. But the truth is the very opposite of this. We are not separate. There is an appearance that we're a separate person, and we are having the experience of being a separate person. But for a magnificent life filled with lasting happiness, stay aware of the truth that you're an infinite, eternal consciousness awareness, and that there is only one of us. And I would love to leave you with that. Although, let me just go a little bit further because it is so good. The end of problems. We believe we have a problem with when something has gone differently from what we expected it to, or when we feel something has gone wrong. Our mind's immediate response to a problem is, I don't want this. Yet, problems exist only in the human mind. Problems are not real. Problems are only imagined. There are no problems. It's impossible. What you are is free of problems. Problems are manufactured, every single one of them. All problems are based on memory. In this moment, there are no problems. If there were no human minds, there would be no problems. All problems exist in the human mind. And I'm just now, Anthony de Mello, the teacher of Ronda Byrne, Hale Dvoskin, they all say the same. All problems are created by the mind. The truth is that problems are just another story created by the thoughts of the mind. It's the mind interpreting, sorry, I can't even read it anymore. Life by telling a story about something that's happened and turning it into a problem. To experience a problem-free life, instead of believing your mind, use the power of your awareness to become aware of your mind. When you're living more and more in awareness, then you will see clearly that problems are imagined limitations. How can the infinite awareness that you are, have a single problem? It's as if you put your hand in the fire and say, oh, oops, it's hot. My hand is burning. Boy, do I have a problem. And then you put your hand back in the fire, and so on, until one day you see that you're doing it and you stop. If you have a problem, you're putting your hands into a problem and yelling, it hurts, and acting as though you're not putting your hand in it. You act as thought you are not doing it, as though you're not doing it, but you are. And this is also, again, from Lester Levinson. All problems come from the ego. You're free when you don't give validity to any problems. The difficulty is that when you believe you have a problem, you will most definitely experience having a problem. But if you can be aware that it's really the mind and it starts telling another negative story, you allow any supposed problem to dissolve and disappear because your belief is not holding it to you or the world anymore. All right, so I'm going to finish here. Again, The Greatest Secret, Rhonda Byrne. It was definitely a huge influence for me, and I know for a lot of you. And I think it's a beautiful compilation of all the non-duality teachers. And there's definitely something that points to your awakening. So have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Bye.